Families are always a fertile ground for a drama. In fact, most of our great plays, Shakespeare included, and also the TV dramas, have family relationships at the center. But one of the downsides of being a playwright is that your own family think that everything you've written is about them. My mother in particular, bless her, always insisted that any maternal figure was an upsetting portrayal of her. But when I told her that she couldn't have been further from my mind when I was writing it, she was even more upset. It's a total no-win situation. But being a writer, I'm always drawn to getting behind the text, to the characters in the Bible, because so often they get trapped into being austere and lifeless stereotypes. The fact is, Jesus was part of a family with all the ups and downs that go with it. And the scriptures are full of real people living real lives in a real world, and that's what makes them so identifiable. So I not only love to explore these characters, but also to fill in the blanks, to colour in the bits that are missing from those familiar scenes, which all too easily become what I would call stained glass. And it's not just an interesting exercise for me, it brings them to life, because in the end, their humanity is another way of God revealing to us something of himself. That's why I believe he not only allows us to bring our imaginations to bear when we read scriptures, but actually makes it necessary for us to do so, to read between the lines, to picture and bring alive some of these real events. So, to our readings, Jesus the teenager in the temple and Jesus at a Canaan wedding. Two incidents in the relationship between Mary and Jesus, giving us insight into a surprisingly human mother-son relationship. And both of them come from John's and Luke's gospel. So a quick bit of background. Theologians tend to agree that Mary was probably one of the main sources of the early life and the early part of Luke's gospel. And Luke was a physician. Interesting that it was a medic who gives us the most detailed account of Jesus' birth, almost as though he went to Mary and said, come on, spill the beans, what really happened? And Luke, as far as we know, was not a disciple during Jesus' lifetime, which for me gives strength to his account, because the opening words of his gospel are, since many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided to write a well-ordered account for you. I love that opening. Practical, organized, rational. I can almost see the spreadsheets and the post-it notes in his room. Luke's gospel was being compiled around 30 years after Jesus' death and would have been based on eyewitness accounts in the oral tradition. Incidentally, the oral tradition had very high currency in those days. It was even admissible in court, in a court of law, and anyone abusing it, telling lies, in other words, could get the death penalty. So you couldn't just make stuff up. Imagine that today. Executions would be rife and politicians rather thin on the ground, I thought. So anyway, back to Mary. She would have been about 15 when Jesus was born, the normal marriageable age at that time, and in her 20s at the temple incident, and about 45 at the wedding at Cana, and late 40s at the time of his death. So sometime between then and her own death, she clearly lived to a good age. There's reason to believe that Luke spent time with her and others collating information and doing his best, as he puts it, to get the record straight. Now, what I love about the gospel accounts is the detail, the little moments that tell us that this is authentic. And it's easy to forget that Jesus was part of a Middle Eastern family with all the relationships and conventions that went with it. In particular, I love the glimpse we get in Luke of Mary's relationship with Jesus. Clearly, it was like so many other son relationships, full of affection, yet really quite feisty as well. For example, we heard in our reading, the only incident we have of Jesus' early life was when he seemed to have behaved utterly irresponsibly. Now, shocking as that might be to hear, that's how Luke records Mary's reaction when, as a young teenager, he went missing in the temple. "Why have you treated us like this?" she says. "Look, your father and I have been searching for you with great anxiety," she says, or rather Luke says that she says. Well, I wonder how many of us here have witnessed a scene where a teenage member of the family has either been late back or, worse still, gone out without letting anyone know where they are. And when the culprit returns, the roller coaster of emotion on behalf of the parents and the family ranges from intense relief and tears to irate and speechless anger. Well, we tend to think of this as being a contemporary problem, but I believe that that scene has probably been acted out since time immemorial, and that Jesus and Mary were no exception.
Where on earth have you been? I asked you a question.
Here,
What do you mean, here? We've been looking everywhere for you. Why didn't you tell us?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? And look at me when I'm talking to you, please.
I don't know. I thought you would have guessed
Guessed what?
where I was.
I don't want to spend my life guessing where you are. I want you to tell me. I prefer to know rather than to guess, and hope and pray that you're not lying dead in a ditch somewhere. Or does that sound unreasonable in some way?
Well, please don't shout.
I'm not shouting. What have you been doing anyway?
Chatting.
What, for 3 days? Chatting to who?
Friends.
What friends?
Well, people I've met.
People. Who are these people? Do you know them?
Well, I do now.
Don't get clever with me, young man. Don't start getting clever with me.
I'm sorry, but it's true. I met a lot of interesting people. We got talking, and I guess, well, I just didn't notice the time. I'm sorry.
Evidently.
I'm sorry.
We've been worried sick. What were you thinking of?
I said, I'm sorry.
I know you did. I heard you the first time. Whether or not I believe you is another matter. Where did you stay?
What do you mean?
Look, is it me or is it you? Because I keep asking you a simple question and all you do is ask me another.
I'm sorry.
It's becoming a habit. You could make yourself very unpopular doing that. Now, let's try again. Where did you stay? You can't have been chatting for 3 days without sleep.
Well, we kind of were, actually.
What about?
Stuff.
What do you mean, stuff?
Well, you know, stuff.
No, I don't know. Tell me, because I'd really like to know.
Interesting stuff.
Oh, interesting stuff. I see. And while you were discussing interesting stuff, together with the meaning of life and generally setting the world to rights, did it not occur to you? Did it not cross your mind for 1 second to let us know where you were and what you were doing?
Well, I did, but
But what?
I forgot.
You forgot. Of course. Meanwhile, your father and I had to contact our friends, rearrange our plans, endure several sleepless nights, and eventually, in desperation, come all the way back here to find you, just so that you could have a nice lengthy chat with your nice new friends discussing stuff.
Well, they weren't just friends. They were teachers, some of them, really interesting. I wish you could have met them. One of them he'd travelled a very, very long way.
I don't care. I'm not interested. And the last thing I want to do is meet them. Thank you very much. What shocks me most is that you could treat your father and me so badly.
I didn't mean to.
But the point is, Jesus, you did. And don't give me that look either. 3 days. 3 whole days you went missing. Do you have any idea what that was like for us?
No, Mother.
3 of the worst and longest days of my life. That's what. Don't ever, ever, ever do that to me again. Do you understand?
Yes, Mother.
If you go missing for 3 days again, you tell us where you're going and when you are coming back. Is that understood?
Yes, Mother.
Do I have your word?
You have my word.
Good. Enough said. Stage 1 over.
What do you mean?
Well, you've survived my wrath. Now you have your father to answer to. God alone knows what he'll have to say.
So, I may have taken a bit of license with that, but have a look at that account in Luke. Whilst having studied it carefully and then obviously guessed at the dialogue, the essence is right there in the text, or rather, as Mary told it to Luke. She was clearly furious, baffled, emotionally at the end of her tether, and rightly so, as any anxious mother would be. But it's important to see how the story ends. Then he went down with them to Nazareth and was obedient to them, and Jesus increased in wisdom and years and in divine and human favor. So they all became friends again. But there's much speculation about what happened to Jesus in the intervening years, and the truth is we don't know. But staying with Jesus and Mary's relationship, and fast forward about 18 years, we come to our second reading, John's account of the wedding at Cana. Picture a wonderful Galilean village wedding in Cana, about 4 miles from Nazareth. Weddings often happened then in the autumn and went on for several days. The wedding couple must have been known to Jesus' family, so he and Mary and other relatives were all present. But at a certain point, short of the bride actually not turning up, the worst thing of all happened.
Nice party.
Yes, good to see some old faces.
Yes. They've run out of wine, you know.
I know,
I've just spoken to the steward.
I know. I saw you.
And
And what?
what are you going to do about it?
I don't know what you mean.
Yes, you do. Come on.
Why do you always have to get involved?
I'm not getting involved. He looked worried, so I asked him if everything was all right.
It's called getting involved.
No, it's called being helpful. So do you think you can?
Can what?
Dear me, it's like pulling teeth.
Mother, why do you always do this? Ever since I was a child, you did this.
Did what?
Put me on the spot.
Nonsense. Anyway, I'm your mother. It's my job.
It's interfering.
It is so unfair. I never interfere. When have I ever interfered?
When you came looking for me at the temple,
It was nearly 20 years ago. Disappeared without telling anyone where you were.
I was in conversation with a really interesting rabbi, and you came charging in, arms waving, screeching like a fishwife. Where on earth have you been? I was so embarrassed. What's so funny?
Nothing.
Well, then why are you smiling?
I never think of you as being embarrassed.
I've never forgotten it.
No, neither have I. You were gone for 3 days and we were all worried sick. Anyway, what are you going to do?
About what?
The wine. This is a family wedding. They're some of our oldest friends and this is extremely awkward for them.
Well, this is not the time or the place.
Says who?
Mother, will you stop?
Fine. Steward!
What are you doing?
Being helpful. Steward. Yes, now I've had a word with him and it's all sorted, so just do whatever he tells you. Jesus?
You really do stretch my patience sometimes.
And I love you too, but the nice man is waiting.
You have stone jars that you use for cleansing, 6, I believe. Good. Fill them with water.
What, all of them?
Mother, please. You're doing it again,
Just seems,
as I was saying.
it just seems a little excessive, that's all, sorry.
When you have done this, steward, come and tell me. Well, off you go. Oh, and thank you.
They're huge, those stone jars.
I know they are.
They hold 20 gallons each.
I know they do.
What weddings are you planning to save? Oh, don't look at me like that.
Mother, you are indeed my mother, and I love and respect you like any son should.
Yes, but you're not like any son. And it's not interfering, it's encouragement.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. I know you, Jesus. You've always needed a bit of a push. And what, pray, is funny about that?
Never mind. Ah, here comes the steward. So, did you do as I asked? Ah, thank you. Well, don't just stand there, start serving it.
Is that it?
You're never satisfied, are you? Always has to be a drama. What would you prefer, that I call down an army of angels in funny sun hats and get them to start treading grapes?
No need to be sarcastic. I just hope it's a decent vintage, that's all.
Mother, please. I am not known for the average supermarket plonk.
Well, let's see. The steward's pouring a cup for the host now. The moment of truth, as they say.
Indeed. Now I think it all begins.
It seems you're right. The whole table are raising their cups to you. Yes, thank you. Smile, dearest. They're saying it tasted like miraculous.
Well, there's nothing miraculous about it. Every year, every vineyard in Galilee does it with rain. Only difference is I did it a bit quicker.
Music! I want to dance.
Me too. Come on, old lady, on your feet. Let's show them how it's done.
Or you, not so much of the old.
What? I thought they'd like to see a real miracle, that's all. Well, it may be that these little imaginative excursions are entertaining, and I make no apology if they are. But I have learned over many years that God has given us all an imagination, and it's to be enjoyed as part of our spiritual growth. Without it, reading the scriptures can become very dry and very lifeless. Jesus himself spoke to our imaginations all the time using stories: the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, the wise, the foolish maidens, the unforgiving servant, and also images: vines, sheep, corn sowing, and most significantly, bread and wine. We cannot make sense even of the communion service itself without employing a little imagination. And all to what end? To serve one purpose, I believe: to find out who God is and for him to reveal himself to us. It is a choice, I believe, that he gives us. If we search for him, he gives us permission to find him. A real God in a real world. Jeremiah says, "When you search for me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, says the Lord." Amen.